Welcome to A Moment of Xen. Time to sit back and relax as model, actress, mentor, and supermom Xen Sams takes you on a sexy and wild ride, covering the latest in film, fashion, pop culture, cryptocurrency, fintech, cannabis, and entertainment from the millennial mom's perspective. Here's your host, Xen Sams.
Welcome back, beautiful New York, tri-state area, and beyond. You're listening to A Moment of Xen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Xen Sams. Welcome to episode 256. And today's through line is ownership. Ownership of your body, ownership of your belief, ownership of your influence, ownership of your nervous system. We begin with Sculpting the Future series brought to you by alloClae and Tiger Aesthetics. As we approach International Women's Day, we're having a conversation not about more, but about refinement. Today's headliner is Sculpting the Future, the new category of body contouring for women who want correction, not implants. Joining me are two leading plastic surgeons, Dr. Anna Steve and Dr. Akash Chandawarkar, who are helping redefine proportion, balance, and autonomy in modern aesthetics. Next, we're going to step into the Hydration with Heart series brought to you by Once Upon a Coconut. According to the American Psychological Association, there's over 60% of Gen Z reporting chronic stress and anxiety. So what does belief look like now? Well, today's headliner is Faith Without Labels, how Gen Z is redefining prayer, belief, and connection to that higher power. I'm going to be joined by Gabe Einhorn, founder of the modern faith-based brand Praise, and creator and cultural voice Max Cohen, known to many as MurrayHillBoy, two young leaders redefining belief, identity, and spiritual alignment in real time. Then we move into the Heart of Influence series brought to you by Diamond Lake and its subsidiaries. We're chatting the business of belief, how broken systems are forcing leaders and artists to rebuild ownership, trust, and influence from the ground up. I'm joined by globally ranked CEO Brian J. Esposito of Diamond Lake Minerals and independent music powerhouse Adam McInnes, co-creator of Sons of Legion and founder of Journey, JRNY, exploring how ownership, alignment, and belief are reshaping the future of capital and creativity. And we close with the Brain Blueprint series brought to you by the Melillo Centers. Today's integrated headliner is Behavior is the Symptom, understanding the nervous system behind the meltdown and why the home becomes the first brain blueprint. We're joined by writer, activist, and autism mom Stephanie Hanrahan, alongside the world-renowned clinician and brain expert Dr. Robert Melillo, unpacking what's really happening inside the nervous system and how small brain-based shifts inside the home can change everything. Stay tuned for the Brain Blueprint series coming up next. You're listening to A Moment of Xen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. We'll be right back after this.
A Moment of Xen is brought to you by Your Home TV with Kathy Ireland and their channel partners. Head to yourhometv.com for free, family-friendly programming, streaming 24/7.
In business and in life, there's always an upside. Finding it is often the challenge. Having a mindset that looks for it and embraces problems as opportunities is the key to thriving. Finding the upside with Maria de Lorenzis Reyes explores the transformative power of optimism, featuring visionary business owners, influential leaders, and inspiring everyday people. Tune in and see how they navigate changing conditions with optimism and innovation. Watch the special series One Tough Chick, highlighting resilient and powerful women, streaming on yourhometv.com.
Tune in to A Moment of Xen, Saturday nights from 9 to 10 p.m. on 710 WOR, the voice of New York.
Welcome back, beautiful tri-state area and beyond. You're listening to A Moment of Xen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Xen Sams. Today's conversation lives inside the Brain Blueprint series brought to you by the Melillo Centers, where we move beyond labels and behaviors and focus on what's actually happening inside the brain and how families can move from survival mode toward regulation, balance, and real progress. Our headliner today is Behavior is the Symptom, understanding the nervous system behind the meltdown and why our home becomes the first brain blueprint. Now, meltdowns are not discipline failures. They are neurological stress responses. Today, we're unpacking what's happening in the nervous system when behavior escalates, why the emotional and sensory environment of the home matters more than most parents realize, and how small brain-based shifts can change well, everything. Joining us is Stephanie Hanrahan. She's a writer, a TEDx speaker, an activist, and an autism mom whose work has reached millions after she made her private journal public, documenting the unfiltered reality of parenting neurodivergent children. She's also the founder of the PIP. It's an online platform supporting families of all abilities. Alongside me, as always, is our co-contributor, Dr. Robert Melillo, world-renowned clinician, researcher, and best-selling author of Disconnected Kids, widely recognized for helping families understand the neurological why behind behavior and what to do about it. Welcome to the show, superstars.
Thank you.
Hi, Zen. So glad to have you.
So excited to speak with you, Stephanie. Dr. Melillo, so nice to chat with you again. Welcome back. So neuroscience tells us that when the brain perceives chronic stress, it prioritizes survival over reasoning. And we know this from research. The Harvard Center on the Developing Child and Frontiers in Psychology report shows that prolonged nervous system activation impacts emotional regulation and executive function and even language access, especially in neurodivergent children. So before you had language for any of this, what did meltdowns actually represent in your home, Stephanie? What were you seeing, and what were you feeling in those specific moments?
Yes, well, I have two children on the spectrum, a daughter and a son. And although they share a diagnosis, oftentimes their autism presents very differently. My son was very susceptible to breakdowns or meltdowns, if you will. And it's interesting because when he was younger, and these were occurring quite frequently, I later learned that what he was seeking during those moments and what I was seeking to hold on to was actually the same thing, which was control. And a little background on me, I have a history of very early childhood trauma and abuse. And so I grew up, my brain developed in a way where it prioritized control and safety. And I became a very hypervigilant little girl and grown girl. And so I relied in my home a lot on predictability and quiet and calm. And if you're familiar with autism, it's anything but those things at times. So my son emotionally would be having these breakdowns and outbursts, and internally and sometimes externally, I'd be having them too. So we weren't able to co-regulate at all because we both needed strategies.
Wow. Well, that reframing matters so much because it moves parents out of shame and into understanding. So what you're describing isn't, bad behavior. It's a nervous system asking for relief, actually on both ends. Dr. Melillo, this is where you come in.
Yeah. So, again, from my perspective, and not putting you on a hot seat in anything, but just you're a mom that has done so much and knows so much and wrote so much. Has anybody really explained to you what autism is in the brain? Like what is actually happening in the brain, not the symptoms, not any of that, but what it actually is.
I'd love to hear it from your perspective. That would be great.
That's the shocking thing, right? A mom as knowledgeable as you, as sensitive as you, as in tuned as you, nobody's ever even tried to explain that to you. And even the balance, the whole fight or flight thing, is that really it's an imbalance in what we call the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And we see it in people with ACEs, meaning people that have adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And we see it in autism. And it is mostly due to a right brain delay, because the right brain is what usually develops that emotional regulation. So the ability to self-regulate, all kids start out with co-regulation, especially with the mom. And then as the mom is doing that in the first 18 months to 2 years, the right brain is developing. That interaction literally makes it develop. And then they develop their own ability to self-regulate. But if you never develop that area of your right brain appropriately, and he's also feeling that, and in autism, they're not developing that. And so, the way you describe it is perfectly. They're in this fight or flight stress response that looks like a meltdown or is a meltdown. And yet, you're not able to self-regulate. He's not able to self-regulate. And all of this is happening at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd concur with that for sure.
And it's interesting because when the nervous system is dysregulated, the brain loses access to logic and language. Behavior becomes communication at that point, not choice. And it's a bad cycle, right? So Stephanie, the studies that we looked at, they're published in developmental psychology, they show that parental stress directly correlates with increased emotional reactivity in children, not because parents are doing something wrong, but because nervous systems co-regulate, like Dr. Melillo just alluded to, and kids absorb emotional tone long before they process instruction. So how did your own exhaustion or your grief or your own trauma and pressure to hold everything together shape the emotional environment inside your home?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, I kind of received the memo that differences were deficits. I, grew up in a generation where you didn't openly share about the ways in which you differed. And even though I did not have a disability, I innately felt very different because of the things that had happened to me, because of the way that my mind worked. And we didn't have the internet. You couldn't go online and find people like you. No one at the local grocery store was saying me too. There wasn't classroom inclusion in the very small town that I grew up in. And so I developed this sense that the ways you differ are worthy and unwrong. And so when I became a mother, I had spent years masking my own differences and making sure that I presented myself with this front of perfectionism as a defense mechanism, as a safety measure. And then I had 2 autistic children, and there was no room to hide anymore. Autism is a difference that's lived out loud. And so I was really wrestling with the idea of, for a long time, how do we hide this? How do we mask this? How do we follow what the world tells us is good and worthy? And that was creating a lot of chaos in my home, a lot of disconnect in my home, and from myself as well, relationally with them. And so it was only when I introduced that idea of like radical acceptance for myself first, and then extending it outward to my that I was really able to feel an emotional shift in our home. And I think there was a study I read years ago that really stuck with me on this. There was sweat samples were collected in a lab from participants that had run on a treadmill and then first-time skydivers. And even though the sweat samples looked identical, when they were given to a second set of participants to smell or inhale, the one that was triggered by fear, the people just skydiving for the first time, was the one that activated the amygdala and the brain's threat detection center in those blind participants. And that stuck with me so much because it made me realize if strangers in a lab can react to someone else's fear by smelling it, what can my children sense who are in the home with me every day and rely on me for emotional regulation? What are they picking up without me ever saying a word? And so that's why I'm a big advocate for, if a parent doesn't heal, a child will always hurt in some way.
Ooh, that's some deep stuff, and you are spot on. I love that. That really spoke to me. I love that you gave us that example, and I think this gives parents permission to be human and to realize that caring for their own regulation isn't selfish; it's foundational.
Yeah, we receive that martyrdom memo as mothers, right? I would die for my children, but would you live for them? Would you go heal for them? Would you go do the work and the therapy individually? It can only benefit you within the home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important because we actually, in our centers in New York, we have a room where we do specific brain rehabilitation and stimulation. And we have one for children and one for adults for the very reason that we often need to work with the parents at the same time with the child. And because they're so busy, the only time they have time to do that is when their child is being treated by us. But what we find, things like retained primitive reflexes, which are really critical to brain development, we find that in the child and one or both of the parents, they usually have a similar pattern. And I've even seen where one mom and her son who was on the autism spectrum, they both have what's called a spinal galan. And the son, we couldn't get rid of that until we got rid of it in the mom. So there is this relationship where your brain, especially mom's brains, resonate with your kids, like you're saying, in multiple streams. Sense of smell is hugely important. We test it on every kid. Nobody tests it, but mainly it's important not because of how it affects food, but because it also is the foundation of social networks. That's where those pheromones and everything that you're talking about. But, the question I have is when you began changing how the home felt, rather than trying to control behavior, what shifts did you notice first in your kids and in your home and in yourself?
Well, I think the biggest shift came when I finally reached the point where I was openly talking about autism with them, with everyone, and offering that acceptance. They began to offer it to themselves too. And so you brought up earlier, I said, the fact that like human homes are more, we kind of alluded to the fact that human homes are better than happy homes. And I think that's a mistake that moms often make or parents often make sometimes, is saying, I just want my kid to be happy. I just want them to be happy. Well, I want my kids to be human. And the human experience is full of a gamut of emotions. And so when I dropped that veil of perfectionism, we together learned to name everything that we were feeling. And so I believe truly in my heart, it's not the rupture that causes the damage. It's the lack of repair afterwards. So I know moms are so hard on themselves for being overwhelmed or flat. I slip into a flat affect sometimes. I detach, right, in order to protect myself from the chaos in the world around me. And I was really hard on myself. What damage am I doing to my kids? But what I began to realize is that as long as I was naming that, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm going to go take a break. Mom's feeling really anxious right now, I'm going to go outside and take a walk. Whatever those examples were, I would start saying them out loud to my children. And now my children are almost 10 and 12, and they do the same. They do their same in peer groups. I need to take a break from playing this game and feeling a little overwhelmed. And so those were the biggest shifts that I really saw, is being able to not only feel our emotions, but put language to them. And then that widened their experience and their relation with myself and my husband, but also with their peers and their social networks.
That's critical insight, because the brain doesn't heal in chaos. It heals in rhythm and in safety, and more importantly, in consistency. So when the environment stabilizes, regulation follows.
Yeah, and what you said was also really important. And I'll talk about it after Zen, when we talk about how that relates to like attachment development and attachment disorders.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could address it now if you wanted to. I mean,
because you mentioned something that was really important. In attachment research, which is some of the best research done in psychology, we know that ideal attachment, which fortunately happens most of the time, is not that there's not a breakdown, not that there's not some sort of fighting or arguing that goes on, or where there's a break in the relationship. It's where there's a repair. And where the parent knows enough to be able to, repair it with the child. It's not perfect parenting. It's when there is any sort of split, that there is knowledge that we want to, repair that as quickly as possible. And what we see in attachment disorders is there isn't that, right? And to varying degrees, and especially in the most severe form where you see abuse, it's the opposite of repair. There's more violence. And that, again, attachment itself and building relationships is all right brain. So you instinctively came up with actually the language that's used in psychological research. It's pretty astute.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's, the goal used to be for me, harmonious home 100% of the time. But now I feel like that's an unrealistic goal. It should be, there will be rupture, and how can we repair it? And that has deepened my relationship immensely with my children.
And one of the most important things I've learned through this series is that autism is not a physical look. It's a neurological profile. And so many children, especially girls, engage in masking. And while masking may look like functioning, it can come with anxiety and exhaustion and delayed support, because people assume they seem fine. Now, your daughter is autistic, but to the outside world, she may appear typical. What misconceptions or judgments or even harsh remarks have you had to navigate when a disability isn't visible?
Oh, so many. So this is something we deal with both online on our platform and off. I'll give a brief example. Over Halloween, we went to a fall festival. My daughter went up to the booth to play the game, and she won. And there was 2 baskets there. There was candy, and there was a basket of sensory toys, fidgets. And so she reached for the fidget, and the woman running the booth said, no, sweetie, those are for special needs children. And my daughter, who's very proud of her disability, was like, that's awesome. I'm autistic and I love fidgets. They really help me regulate. And so the woman looked at her and said, you don't look like you have autism. Like, And she kept questioning her. And I stood back at first and kind of watched my daughter advocate for herself, which was learned behavior. I think she had watched me over the years encounter this situation many times. And we talked through it afterwards and processed it together. But that is something that I think is a huge misconception, is the look, the stereotype. I mean, when I was growing up, we had one model, which was Rain Man. When my children were diagnosed, I did not have any updated visual representation from the media. I'm so glad we've made leaps and bounds in the last decade and a half, but there is a lack of awareness of what that side of the spectrum perhaps can look like. And then I think there's this equation that they don't need, because they don't look like they have a disability. They don't look like they need services or support. And that could be not further from the truth. And it's kind of why I shy away from the terms high functioning and low functioning. I think they provide very little valuable information about what the child actually needs. Because my children use words as language does not mean that they don't need other supports in other areas. So it's just reshifting and that stigma and that stereotyping. And that's why we personally are so open and proud about their diagnoses, that hopefully in some small way, we can be a more updated model for what that side of the spectrum can be.
Well, yeah, demystifying the stigmas surrounding what the look should look like is step number one, and you're addressing it head on. And I love that you're very open about it. And I'm glad you said what you said, because when we only validate disability if it looks a certain way, we deny people the support they actually need. And that's why we're having this conversation, to really spread awareness and put the support out there. Dr. Melillo, I'd love your reaction to that, because you see both sides of this.
Yeah, well, there's so many misconceptions and misunderstandings that almost everybody, including, most doctors of all specialties, about autism in particular. But, first of all, what we know is that there are genetic disorders, and genetic disorders produce facial features or physical features, and that's called syndromic. That's not what autism is. Autism is not a genetic mutation. So if anything, it's been known for years in the literature that children with autism are often sometimes even more beautiful than typical kids. They have more refined features, which also leads to the idea that I've always said, and we've proven, that kids on the spectrum or kids with any disability or adults, it actually starts with them being gifted. I'm sure your children are phenomenal and maybe even savant level at certain skills. And that's not coincidental. That is part of the imbalance, which is what autism is. And so, we do find that girls especially are really good at masking. I had, a very famous actor, his daughter, who was, really verbal and on the spectrum and had horrible tics that we were able to get rid of in about 4 weeks. But when the tics went away, she came in and she said she felt this overwhelming sadness and fear. And she had never felt it before. And so I said to her, well, that means your right brain came on and stopped the tics, but you're feeling that emotion, and everybody feels sadness. And she said, everybody feels sad? She said, I didn't know that. Now, I went to her parents and they said, it's funny, she used to act like she was sad. She would say she was sad, but she had never actually felt the emotion. So she didn't really even conceive of it. So she knew enough to mask it, but she really didn't know what it was. But the question is, from your perspective, what does masking do long-term emotionally and neurologically when a child feels pressure to pass as typical?
Well, I think they become me for the majority to what we described earlier. I can only speak. I'm not neurodivergent. I was gifted as a child, but I do believe that that there is an expectation for all of us in this world to mask to some degree, right? When someone says, how are you? And you say, I'm good, thank you. And you feel anything but. We have picked up on these social scripts to get us moving through life and for survival. And I think some of that's okay. I think where we cross the line into how much of myself have I lost or compromised or hidden or not felt, then it becomes quite dangerous. And that's where I was at. That's how I became a mother who felt very alone and isolated and admired, but not seen. I think there's a big difference. I morphed myself into whatever my surroundings needed me to be. And at the cost of that is that I lost my identity. I didn't know who I really was. And so I think that's the hesitation of a lot of parents who don't want to. I read a lot of messages that come across my platform of parents who are very hesitant to tell their children that they are autistic. They're withholding that diagnosis and that information from them. And they just don't want them to feel different, is the overarching message that's kind of communicated to me. And my message back is always the same, which is they already feel that way. They already feel that way. Give them permission that it's okay, because the world is never going to send that messaging to them. So within your four walls, you have control over that. And that is a privilege and an honor. And it's also very hard if you haven't worked through what a good and worthy life means for you, if you haven't removed your own mask. And so that's, I think, the long-term consequences. You lose that connection with yourself and others.
Yeah. So one of the most empowering findings in neuroscience is that small, consistent shifts outperform these extreme interventions. And neuroplasticity responds to repetition and safety, not overwhelm or perfection, right? So for parents listening right now who are depleted and just unsure where to start, what's one realistic shift that helped your home feel calmer and more regulated?
I mean, outside of what we talked about earlier, where naming those feelings as they kind of arise, I would say that I remember reading about the ABCs, antecedent, behavior, consequence. And for so long, this, even if you don't have children that are neurodivergent or autistic, I feel like this was super helpful to me, as so often parents resort to that behavior consequence. You hit your sister, go to your room. It's really clear. You got a bad grade. Now we're not going to let you ride your bike for a week. Behavior consequence. But there's always the antecedent, the cause. And I think that's what we need to support. I think that's the biggest shift for me was, why was my son having these breakdowns? What environmental stimuli was happening? What could we control what you can, right? In those moments, what changes could I make to help him co-regulate? What was the cause? So instead of just jumping right to the behavior, and then the consequence, maybe we can avoid that behavior altogether if we just realize the origin of it. And so that was really helpful for our family, at least, to understand how can we not change our children, that's never our goal, but support them. And a lot of that was realizing what's happening in the brain and how can we best support it, that antecedent.
Well, we are at the end of this conversation. Stephanie, thank you for your honesty, because stories like yours don't just make people feel seen. They give families language for what they're living and permission to pursue support without shame. And that's really what we're trying to do here in the Brain Blueprint series. And Dr. Melillo, well, you know how I feel about you.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for the work.
Same here.
Very important.
Now, for those listening and watching, if you want to keep up with Stephanie, you can visit her website, tinklesherpants.com. And you could follow her directly on the gram at tinklesherpants. And for more information on the Brain Blueprint series and the work of Dr. Robert Melillo and the Melillo Centers, you can go directly to drrobertmelillo.com and check him out on Instagram at Dr. Robert Melillo. You're listening to A Moment of Xen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. That was the Brain Blueprint series brought to you by the Melillo Centers. We'll be right back after this.
A Moment of Xen is brought to you by the Melillo Method Centers, where hope truly lives, specializing in ADHD, dyslexia, autism, and other neurological challenges. Dr. Robert Melillo and his team create personalized treatment plans that go beyond symptom management. Using advanced neuroscience, they help children and adults reach their fullest potential. Families worldwide choose the Melillo Method for answers and results. Begin your journey to better brain health at drrobertmelillo.com.
Welcome back, beautiful New York, tri-state area and beyond. You're listening to A Moment of Xen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Xen Sams. Welcome back to Sculpting the Future series, brought to you by alloClae and Tiger Aesthetics. As we approach International Women's Day, we're having a very specific conversation, not about bigger, not about extremes, but about something women quietly struggle with every single day: asymmetry, hip dips, post-liposuction contour irregularities, volume loss after pregnancy or weight shifts. So today's headline is Sculpting the Future, the new category in body contouring for women who want correction, not implants. And this conversation is about the women who've been told it's not bad enough for surgery. Your only option is implants, or worse, just live with it. Now, according to the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, there's more than 70% of aesthetic consultations that don't result in surgery. And one of the top reasons cited is that patients feel the available options are just too invasive for what they actually want. Additionally, published findings in aesthetic surgery journals show that contour irregularities and asymmetry are among the leading causes of dissatisfaction following body procedures, particularly when revision options are limited. So the marketplace problem is quite clear. Women want correction, not escalation, refinement, not replacement. And that's where alloClae has created an entirely new category in non-surgical body contouring. I'm joined by two exceptional plastic surgeons who understand both structure and aesthetics at the highest level, Dr. Anna Steve and Dr. Akash Chandawarkar. Dr. Anna Steve is a New York City-based plastic surgeon right here, known for her meticulous patient-centered approach and expertise in natural-looking enhancement and small volume correction. And Dr. Akash is a board-certified plastic surgeon with advanced training in both reconstructive and aesthetic surgery, known for refined, balanced results and thoughtful long-term planning. Welcome to the show, superstars.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Thanks for having us.
I'm going to start with you, Dr. Steve. So in your practice, you see women who don't necessarily want surgery, but they also don't want to ignore asymmetry and the hip dips or contour irregularities that really affect how they feel in clothing or in their own skin. So what problems does this lack of an in-between solution, if you will, create for patients seeking that subtle natural correction?
Yeah, I mean, I see mostly women who are considering breast enhancement, and most of those women are women who have busy lives, busy careers, busy home lives. They're trying to run a household and manage their careers. And so they're looking for solutions that have minimal downtime. And that's where I think a lot of them are considering either options that are more procedural in nature and less surgical, or options that are more aligned with that shorter downtime.
Yeah, and that's quite the important distinction to make, because it really validates that something can be subtle medically but significant emotionally, right?
Yeah.
And now, so Dr. Akash, from both a reconstructive and an aesthetic perspective, where have traditional tools like implants or liposuction fallen short when addressing asymmetry or post-procedure deformities?
So, let's take each of those a little separately. Implants are lifetime devices and foreign bodies. And despite all the advancements in implant technology over the years, there's still going to be a foreign body reaction of some sort that occurs over the lifetime of that patient. We're still using formulaic shaped breast prostheses to treat diverse needs with respect to size and shape. And that's even within the same patient who may be asymmetric with respect to size and shape. So it's kind of a one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't really work for a lot of patients, even within their own bodies. Then correcting any minor asymmetries or issues that occur require a full surgery, usually with a lot of internal construction. So that's not really the most optimal option for patients. If we look at liposuction, especially with fat grafting, it's a great idea and concept, but inherently the biology of moving a living fat cell out of its home and to another is highly unpredictable. It relies on a lot of other factors to get decent survival of that fat, which then in turn creates asymmetries and unpredictability. And on top of that, like we spoke about, and especially in my patient population here in Florida, a lot of our patients don't have enough of their own fat, making all of this a little bit of a moot point with respect to fat grafting. And we were seeing more of that with patients losing weight rapidly on the peptides and GLPs.
And that long-term perspective that you just outlined actually really matters, because patients don't just live with results for 6 months. I mean, they live with them for years, right? And I think that this perspective and evaluating it from okay, do you want to place something foreign in your body, and giving them the black box warning disclosure that comes with it, by the way, right? And being transparent like that is also very important for plastic surgeons, especially for us women who rely on just your word and your interpretation. So I think that's an extremely important framing to be able to control that narrative, which brings me to the next question, Dr. Anna. We're seeing a noticeable shift in what women want, right? Like according to the McKinsey's 2025 Future of Wellness report, personalization and minimally invasive solutions are among the fastest growing segments in aesthetics. So why are more women prioritizing proportion and balance and flexibility over that dramatic or permanent structural change, do you think?
I think it has to do with a lot of different things. For some women, it's about their active lifestyle. For some women, it's about their fashion. For others, it's about not wanting a departure from what is their own anatomy, but more so subtle changes and restoring maybe what was lost during times like breastfeeding and pregnancy. And so I think in a lot of ways, the aesthetic world is shifting into more of an undetectable, natural, quiet luxury.
I like that. Quiet luxury. Yeah. That really speaks to modern agency. It's not about transformation, it's about alignment. So, Dr. Akash, clinically, when evaluating these new technologies in body contouring, what do you look for to determine whether a solution truly addresses a structural concern rather than simply disguising it?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm a scientist at my core, and you really have to think of the biophysics of these solutions, and especially when thinking about things like alloClae compared to existing technologies for improving contour. In general, in plastic surgery, one of the guiding principles we have is replacing like with like. And most contour issues that patients have are related to alterations in that fat layer. So replacing it with something like a adipose matrix, which is a fat matrix that's created from and therefore will mimic fat, will provide the best like with like solution. And that's why a lot of filler technologies that have been touted to biosimulate or improve contour, especially in the breast or gluteal regions, they don't have the right structure and biophysical components to create proper volumization in those areas. And not only that, different areas of the body require handling different forces to improve contour irregularities there. So treatments that have been specifically engineered towards facial applications, which is most fillers and some existing adipose matrices, they will fall short in the breast and body when exposed to the forces and the muscles and the fascia that you need to create an improvement in that contour irregularity.
And almost if you think of it from a visual perspective, I mean, that's the difference between a temporary visual improvement and something that actually feels resolved, right?
Correct. You want this to be something that actually becomes your own fat because that's what feels the most natural. It doesn't feel like a foreign body. So I think we're moving away from this concept of foreign body and more about regeneration, but we need to regenerate the right things, not just regeneration for the sake of regeneration.
And this is truly its own category, this cadaver donor fat that has gone through a rigorous purification process to strip it from the DNA load and to really allow it to seamlessly really integrate into a woman's breast where it feels natural to the touch and also looks symmetrically, visually appealing. Now, Dr. Anna, as we approach International Women's Day, conversations around autonomy and informed choice are front and center. How does having options beyond implants change the emotional dynamic of a consultation, especially for women who want correction without committing to surgery?
Well, I think we've come a long way in terms of our agency. And I do think with advancements in implant technology and having more biocompatible implants, a lot of women are choosing to combine breast implant surgeries with tools like alloClae. And I certainly work with a lot of women who this actually makes implants a better option for them because they can choose to have their implants placed over the muscle when combined with alloClae versus without, we're committed to more invasive procedures. So I think in a lot of ways, just in aesthetics in general, the more choice we have for our patients, the more we can find the right options that align with what resonates with their aesthetic goals.
And that's incredibly empowering, right? When you give women choices instead of, ultimatums or draw the line in the sand in terms of product availability. This is definitely a home run. They've solved a huge problem in the marketplace. Now, Dr. Chandawarkar, so alloClae uses this proprietary adipose matrix that you spoke about and is really positioned as a non-surgical body contouring option, right, in the marketplace. But from a structural standpoint, how does this expand what's really possible for patients who previously felt like they had like really limited solutions?
Yeah, that's the really cool part about this technology with alloClae. We aren't just filling a hole. That was old technology. We're building living architecture with alloClae. Structurally, the matrix is really made up of two things. It's the extracellular matrix, which is kind of like the foundation of the house, and then the empty house where those fat cells lived. When we place this matrix, the patient's own body will populate that foundation in those houses. So their own cells move into these empty houses, and also new fat cells get generated. After about 6 weeks, that matrix dissolves, and what remains is the patient's own living fat positioned in the right place. So we have no long-term foreign body with alloClae. It's just really a vehicle to create living structure. This is really the bones of true tissue engineering as it has been positioned for many years. And that allows us to direct a patient's own fat into specific anatomies without using surgery. So this is, really revolutionary type technology because we don't really have anything like this out there, but this has been the dream of tissue engineering for many years.
Yeah, and that's where you really see the shift, not just as a new product, but as a new pathway.
Absolutely.
Now, Dr. Anna, in practical terms, how have you seen alloClae help address asymmetry and contour irregularities in a way that aligns with our patient's natural anatomy and aesthetic goals?
Yeah, I think there's lots of applications. Breast reconstruction is one where women have sometimes significant asymmetries between the two sides and really no other solution. And the other thing that I think is important to recognize is while we have excellent options for implant-based breast enhancements, implants, if we're trying to correct asymmetries, if we use two different size implants, they're always two different shapes. And so I like to be able to correct the underlying volume difference between the breasts for a better customized symmetric look. So another kind of application of combining the implants with the alloClae to fine tune those results. And then there are a population of women who are implant averse or have implant fatigue. They've had implants for many years and are interested in being implant free. And in those cases, it offers an excellent solution for volume replacement. As Dr. Zeidler from California would say, it's kind of like fat with benefits. It's a little bit different than fat itself. And there's almost this in-between option we have now. Implants provide good structure, fat provides good volume, and alloClae is a little bit of an in-between that can provide a little bit of structure as well as volume.
Yeah, and that subtlety is what so many women have been asking for. It's what I was asking for, and Dr. Zeidler did perform alloClae on my breasts this past September, 100 cc's in each, and the results are phenomenal. I mean, it's truly, and I was post explant, right? And I refused to put anything. I was like, I don't want anything in my body ever again. And when alloClae reached out, I was, I did my research, and Dr. Zeidler's a good friend. So she performed the procedure in like 90 minutes, 2-millimeter cannula in her office, listening to music. I was like, how far have we come? And you just get up and you look in the mirror and you're like, it's all fixed. The asymmetry, the sagginess, the pancake-like boobs, like it all fixed in one procedure. Now, granted, and this was something I was going to ask you, you can gradually, and what I love about this, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can keep building. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes. And that's where I would say one of the really interesting things that I've seen is many patients who have had experience with alloClae really love the technology and the feel and the experience, and are either interested in knowing where else in their body they might be able to use it, or considering adding more.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Dr. Akash, so for women who've been told their concerns are too minor or for surgery, but still impact their confidence, what guidance would you give them about exploring non-surgical body contouring solutions like alloClae?
Yeah, I think, one of my most common patient subtypes is the fit mom who comes into their consultation and sits in my chair and says, well, my friends say I don't need this. And I tell them they're right. No one needs this, as there's no health urgency, but confidence and feeling good about yourself is an incredibly important quality of life, a part of quality of life. And I tell them that, you consider doing something minor if it's causing them to change who they are themselves or things that they do. So if they're avoiding specific clothing like crop tops that they would normally wear, that's not them being themselves. If they're avoiding certain activities like going to the beach or going on the boat because they're afraid of a contour irregularity somebody might see and makes them feel self-conscious, that's a time to do something about it. If they're feeling nervous in intimate situations with loved ones, it's affecting their relationships. This is where we start to talk about, making sense to do something. I think having both good surgical and non-surgical options for these patients does give them the ability to make these changes and, not feel ashamed about doing. I do think, and especially with these patients, I do distinguish between subtle results and natural results. I think there is a difference. I know we've used the word subtle quite a bit today, but I tell patients that if we do a treatment, they better see or feel a result, and it better not be subtle in terms of how it affects them. Otherwise, they've wasted their money, recovery, or time. But it can still look natural. So when patients ask about specific non-surgical treatments, I tell them to do the squint test. If they have to squint to see the difference between the before and after result, it probably didn't work. So I think you can have a natural result without being subtle about its effectiveness. And I think that's where a lot of snake oil has made its way into the aesthetic industry, by acceptance of subtle results that may not actually be results at all. So I think we should make distinguish between effectiveness of result, which is not subtle at all. But when we have results from alloClae, they're not subtle results. You're seeing it right away, and it's maintaining, and the before and afters are dramatic. So I really love that about this, because you can have a natural looking result, but you've made a result both in your quantifiable results, but also how you feel about yourself.
You are so spot on. Everything you said is 100% accurate. And you're right. It's not about subtle. No one wants subtle. No one pays thousands of dollars for subtle, but you do pay it for natural. Yeah. And so I love that perspective. And I like that you gave permission to women to say that out loud, right? I want that noticeable difference, but I want it to be natural. I want to be able to, see my profile and have my boobs sit in the right position versus flop down, right? Like those are actual expectations that one who's paying would have after a procedure, right? So I love that you're not allowing surgeons to get away with, well, it's subtle. That's great. Yeah, that reframes the entire conversation. It gives women permission to seek solutions without escalating necessarily to surgery, but still be in control of that narrative. And how perfect on International Women's Day.
Absolutely. And, I'm a girl dad, and I appreciate having role models like you guys who are speaking and giving empowerment to many women around. And I think, all women should have a lot of choice. They should not have fear-mongering dictate decisions, and they shouldn't have snake oil also dictate their decisions. Having effective results with good products that are science-driven are the only way forward in our industry to avoid that and truly empower women, especially on International Women's Day.
Well said. Well, Dr. Akash, Dr. Anna, is there anything else you want to add to the conversation?
I think this was great.
All right. Well, there you go. Such an important conversation, especially as we head into International Women's Day, because this isn't about more, it's about better options. Thank you to Dr. Anna Steve. You can learn more at neinsteinplasticsurgery.com, and you can follow her directly on the gram at Anna K. Steve MD. And thank you to Dr. Akash Chandawarkar. You could visit mirrorplasticsurgery.com and follow them on the gram at Mirror Plastic Surgery and at Dr. Akash Plastic Surgery. Today's Sculpting the Future series was brought to you by alloClae and Tiger Aesthetics. To learn more, you can visit alloClae.com. I'm Zen Sams. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. We'll be right back after this.
A Moment of Zen is brought to you by Skin by Sari. Nationally recognized injector Sari Katz is redefining cosmetic treatments with an approach that's subtle, precise, and confidence-driven. Whether you're new to injectables or looking for an expert touch, Sari creates results that enhance your natural features. Never mask them. Discover what personalized aesthetics should feel like. To learn more, visit skinbysari.com or follow at skinbysari on Instagram.
Welcome back, beautiful tri-state area, New York City and beyond. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Welcome back to the Hydration with Heart segment, brought to you by Once Upon a Coconut, a brand rooted in real hydration, clean ingredients, and the belief that what we put into our bodies matters just as much as what we pour into our minds and our hearts. And today's conversation, well, of course, it's about inner hydration, because here's what the research does tell us. According to the American Psychological Association, there's over 60% of Gen Zers that report chronic stress and anxiety driven by uncertainty, pressure, identity exploration, and a world that never seems to slow down. Yet at the same time, studies from Pew Research Centers show Gen Z is less religious but more spiritual and curious than any generation before them. Spiritual curiosity is at its peak. So what does that belief look like now? Well, it's not so much about religion. It's not about rules, but it's about alignment. It's about intention and trust. It's that personal connection to something greater, however you want to define it. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today. Faith without labels. How Gen Z is redefining prayer, belief, and connection to that higher power. Joining me are two voices shaping what belief looks like in real time. First, we have our recurring contributor, Gabe Einhorn. He's the 23-year-old entrepreneur, founder of Praise, a modern faith-based clothing and media brand built to spread belief in an inclusive, accessible way. Gabe also works in commercial real estate finance and is the creator of Verified. It's a new platform simplifying the NYC rental process through secure renter-first technology. And alongside him, we have Max Cohen, known to many as MurrayHillBoy, a dynamic creator with over 500,000 followers across platforms and counting. He uses humor, storytelling, and cultural identity to spread Jewish joy, advocate for LGBTQ visibility, and bridge generational gaps, all while reminding people that kindness and authenticity do in fact matter. Welcome to the show, superstars.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, Gabe, welcome back. Max, so glad to have you. So I'm going to start with you, Gabe. All right, you're 23, right?
Yep.
And you're already balancing entrepreneurship, finance, tech, and really purpose-driven branding is what I call it. That's a lot of pressure at a young age, especially in a culture that glorifies hustle, but rarely talks about grounding. So before belief or prayer even enter the conversation, what drives you personally, you, Gabe, inside, to build and create and take risks at this stage of your life?
For sure, yeah. It's a mix of family and God. I believe that belief in God is really everything. When you have a belief in God, there's no fear of anything that's stopping you. I only fear man. I don't fear man. I only fear God. And on top of that, I have parents that raised me to not be afraid of anything, to chase my dreams, and trust in them that I could do anything, and if I put my mind to it. So I'm okay with failing. I'm okay with making mistakes, and I know that I got to take risks now because later on I'll regret it if I play it safe. So.
Yeah, and before belief or prayer even enter the conversation, there was a Harvard study. It's a medical from Harvard Medical School, and it showed that people who operate from purpose they experience lower cortisol levels and better long-term resilience. So what you're describing is purpose as fuel, not pressure. And I love that you're using your environment and your family to really fuel you. That's amazing. Which brings me to Max. I mean, your content is funny. I took the entire night stalking you last night.
God.
Yeah, I saw some stuff I can't unsee. Yeah, so for those of you curious, you definitely want to head to MurrayHillBoy. But your content is actually, it's really funny and it's relatable and it's really cultural, deeply cultural in many respects. So college life, dating, growing up Jewish, but there's also heart underneath the humor that I at least I was able to connect with you on that level. So when did you realize comedy wasn't just like entertainment for you, but actually a way to connect people and create something meaningful?
For sure. I mean, when I was first getting started, it was just about making myself laugh, making my friends laugh. But I think that comedy is a universal language that people can relate to, whether they've had my lived experiences or not. And seeing the way that it was able to connect people, I was like, why don't I use this platform for more than just comedy, right? Maybe we can all learn something about each other. Maybe I can change people's views on how they would see me as a Jewish and gay man. Maybe not. But, let's try and see what people respond to it. And I've been very lucky that people have responded really positively to my authenticity in however I choose to share it.
Oh, yeah, they really have. And that what you said is powerful because laughter actually lowers everybody's stress hormones and increases that social bonding. So, just by virtue of being around you, whether you're making people laugh or whatnot, that humor activates the brain's reward centers and helps people feel, I guess, seen is a good word.
Sure.
So what you're doing isn't just content. I think it's emotional connection. Now, Gabe, let's talk belief, but not religion, right? So according to the research, there's like 70% of Gen Zers that believe in a higher power, even if they reject traditional labels, right? So how do you personally define prayer or spirituality, and how does it show up when you're making big decisions or facing uncertainty?
For sure, yeah. I mean, for me, prayer it's just talking. It's conversation. It could be with a God, a higher power, whatever you believe. But it's recognizing that there's something greater than you. Being able to talk, have conversations with God or whatever you believe in. And it's not only just for asking stuff, but it's also for thanking stuff, showing gratitude. I wake up every morning, I thank God. I try to thank God throughout the day and talk to God. And then when things get uncertain and difficult, that's like when prayer comes the most, because that's when you think of talking to God, is when things are complicated and you need help. So you'll ask God for help. So that's when you kind of give it up to God or whatever higher power you believe in, and just trust that everything will work out.
And that distinction is so important because it's prayer as intention, not instruction. Yeah, so that intentional reflection, again, comes back to how we feel about us inside. So there's a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, and that part of the brain is responsible for clarity and for decision making and even emotional regulation. So, going back to our expert on the microphones here, is you're describing belief as a stabilizer.
Yeah, I guess.
There you go. I'm converting it. Now, Max, your platform bridges generations and identities, often in unexpected ways. Okay. So have you ever had a moment on or off camera where something aligned so clearly that you thought, okay, the universe is definitely listening right now?
Yeah. I wasn't always making videos online for a living. I did have an original career path of thinking I was going to be a lawyer and go to law school. And I was working as a paralegal at a very large law firm. And I was super unsatisfied with my time there, but I kind of felt trapped because there were so many expectations on me to continue this path forward. And my manager on my team was like, I need one of you to go work for our clients for a couple of months instead of working here. And I was like, this is my chance. If I don't take it now, it's going to pass me by. And what was great about that job that I ended up taking, working for a client, is the workday was structured very differently, and it gave me so much free time outside of work to pursue my other interests. And that was actually when I got started creating videos, which would have never been afforded to me had I not taken that chance.
Perfect alignment.
Yep.
And those moments stay with us, right? The meaning making experiences when life clicks into place and reinforces direction. I mean, they're often the moments people reference during periods of growth or transition. Now, Gabe, entrepreneurship can be, I guess, isolating in many ways, especially when you're building something purpose-driven. Was there a defining moment where you felt supported by something bigger than yourself? I mean, even if the outcome wasn't what you originally planned?
For sure, yeah. I mean, they say it's lonely at the top, and I feel that sometimes. I was actually going through a tough time this summer, just trying to figure out what I was doing with my career. I decided to go back to Israel, actually. I feel like it's the holiest place in the world. Was looking for clarity and was able to reconnect with God and my purpose. And from there, figured out what I wanted to do with my career, had some good ideas, let some problems go away. And I realized that, when you look back at things, even like the worst situations in the moment, it sucks. But then you look back and you realize that everything ends up always working out, and really everything's part of God's plan. So,
Oh, I mean, well said. Everything is part of God's plan. And that surrender piece is huge because it shows that people who practice trust, not control, right? We recover faster from setbacks and experience that greater emotional stability. And that's kind of resilience in action because it really causes you to pause and reflect.
sure.
Max, you openly represent both the Jewish and the LGBTQ communities online, and that takes courage in a digital world that can be unforgiving. So, how do you stay grounded in who you are when outside voices and algorithms or expectations or ecosystems try to define you?
Listen, I'd be lying if I said that I was able to ignore all of it. I think part of putting yourself online is you're getting hundreds of thousands of opinions every day, but I try to strain through it and pick out the positive, really look at myself when the constructive criticism comes in. And for the blatant anti-Semitism or homophobia, I just let that go because I can't put my energy towards things that don't serve me. But I try my best to be an open ear. If people are interacting with your content, that's a great thing. So giving them the respect of hearing what they have to say is important to me.
Yeah, you got it coming on both ends there between
everyone
homophobia
hates
and
me.
anti-Semitism. I'm dodging bullets left and right. But what you said is that self-anchoring, that's essential because identity affirming practices are linked to, you being able to know who you are, lower your anxiety regardless of what the outside world is saying, and higher your self-esteem, especially, when young adults are navigating visibility and vulnerability. I think your reframe, what you just said, shapes it very nicely because number one, the universe doesn't judge you by who you love. It judges you by the effort that you put in day to day, right? And I think that being representative and vocal is very, very rewarding to see, especially in your generation. It's not, the bold moves that you take are not often part of your generation's narrative, if you will.
Sure.
So Gabe, look, praise feels modern. I keep sending people to your page. I keep telling people, look how cool Gabe is making, prayer again. It feels minimalist as well. And it's not preachy, right? Because, you don't want it to be preachy. Yeah. What was the moment you realized that belief could be expressed in a way that feels current and accessible to really make it relevant to this generation? Like, what was that defining aha moment?
For sure, yeah. Well, one of the things that I want to do is make God cool again. It sounds silly, but that's my idea. And it all started when I was starting in the workplace about 3 years ago. It was in real estate, and they always said 2 rules: don't talk about God and don't talk about politics. And I was like, okay, politics I get. Like, I'm not going to talk about politics. Don't want to get into fights with people. But God, I didn't really understand. So then I realized, okay, I have a connection with God. I have my own relationship with God. So why not try to make God cool again? And what better way to do that than do street interview content, clothing? So I decided to pick up. You saw the video of me going to Times Square back in March. Just went to the streets and got a friend, videoed me, and started asking people about God. Got some mixed responses, but for the most part, got a lot of inspirational stories. People opened up emotionally, and I realized that was what my purpose was. So.
Well, you did it with intent, and you met people where they were, and culturally, it's exactly how movements grow.
For sure, yeah.
You were on the money with that. So humor can be armor. You know this. That's your superpower. And it can also be healing, right? So when life feels overwhelming, Max, how do you personally recharge? And are there any rituals, spiritually or not, that help you reset and realign?
Yeah, I mean, my advice would end my career entirely, but I'm a big advocate of putting the phone down. And this is coming from someone who makes their living off people being on their phones 24/7. It's a hamster wheel that we just can't keep up with, even if we tried. And I think, going back to what you said about the voices, a good way to quiet the voices is just to shut them off sometimes. So as someone who's on their phone for a living, I try my best when I'm not working to just be off my phone, whether that's talking with friends or being outside or just not looking at a screen of some kind, even though we're in a room full of screens. It just gives me a second to kind of force me to be with my own thoughts, force me to think about what's actually important to me for that day, and kind of just breathe for a little bit.
Well, there you go. I love it. Wise words spoken by MurrayHillBoy.
Thank you.
I love it. Well, the two of you, thank you so much. This conversation is such a reminder that belief, I always say, doesn't have to look one way. It just has to feel true to you. You both reinforced that today. And thank you for being open, honest, and transparent. And of course, that inner hydration, trust, alignment, intention is just as vital as physical hydration. So Max, thank you so much for coming on to headquarters today. Gabe, thanks again for bringing inspiring guests.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
For today's guests, you can check them out directly on Instagram. You can go to Max Cohen's Instagram page at MurrayHillBoy and on TikTok. And Gabe, you can check him out directly at gopraise.com, at verified.com. That's VRYFID.com. And of course, stay hydrated with heart by following Once Upon a Coconut. And also Gabe is directly on Instagram at Praise Studio. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. We'll be right back after this.
A Moment of Zen is brought to you by Once Upon a Coconut.
Discover the refreshing taste of 100% pure coconut water that actually tastes great. Naturally sweet with no artificial flavors or added sugar. It's packed with electrolytes to keep you hydrated throughout your day. And with 10% of profits going to charity, every sip makes a difference. Pure taste, pure goodness. Experience nature's Gatorade. Visit Once Upon a Coconut or naturesgatorade.com. Welcome back, beautiful New York tri-state area and beyond. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Welcome back to the Heart of Influence series brought to you by Diamond Lake and its subsidiaries, where we explore how leadership, belief, and intention shape not just success, but impact. Today's episode is titled The Business of Belief, How Broken Systems Are Forcing Leaders and Artists to Rebuild Ownership, Trust, and Influence from the ground up. And this conversation couldn't be more timely. According to Edelman's Trust Barometer, over 60% of people no longer trust institutions to do what's right, whether that's corporations, media, governments, or even platforms that once promised opportunity. And at the same time, creators and founders are walking away from legacy systems that no longer serve them, choosing ownership, alignment, and community over permission. My guests today sit on opposite ends of the traditional spectrum, yet are building toward the same future. I'm joined by my co-contributor, Brian J. Esposito, globally ranked CEO, founder of Esposito Intellectual Enterprises, and the visionary leader behind Diamond Lake's extraordinary transformation, overseeing ventures across more than 25 industries worldwide. I'm joined by Adam McInnes, known as the Soul Shaker, lead singer and co-creator of Sons of Legion, one of the most successful independent bands in the world, and the founder of JRNY, a creator-owned platform redefining how artists protect their voice, their audience, and their future. And what connects these two isn't coincidence, it's belief. Belief in ownership, belief in alignment, and belief that when the right people come together, light attracts light, for the betterment of humanity. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, superstars.
Great to be here, Zen. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, Brian, so nice to have you back. Adam, pleasure that you're joining us today. I'm going to start with you, Brian. So we're seeing this massive trust breakdown in the marketplace. And Harvard Business Review reports that companies with low internal and external trust experience higher volatility, weaker brand loyalty, and slower recovery during the downturns. Yet many leaders still focus on optics instead of fundamentals. So what do you see as the biggest trust failure in today's marketplace? And what are leaders fundamentally getting wrong about how trust is actually rebuilt?
So many ways to answer that question, but I think at the end of the day, it always falls back to really harsh demand on profitability, right? A lot of these companies that are forced by investors, different board members, different personalities, different stakeholders, even if the creator, the founder, the CEO wants to do things a certain way, they're so pushed and manipulated and driven to make sure that, no, you can't do that. There's no money in doing it the good way. There's no engagement doing it the good way. That's why it's so important with people like Adam and Journey. It's staying completely controlled and private. There's no outside influence. It can't be affected. So to me, that's one of the biggest drivers. Outside of that, it's the slot machine effect of humanity. People are always monetizing how do you get someone's reaction. So the best way in the history is to get someone's reaction is always shock. Even the news. The news made all their money on always pushing out negativity, chaos. Wars were amazing. CNN built their whole network because of a war, and who they are today. So when you're looking at legacy history on monetization and using engagement tactics that really harm humanity, bring down the frequency of humanity, it's hard to change that. And when someone tries to change that or change that narrative, they're usually labeled crazy, right? They usually try to put a stigma on them. Well, you can't do that. And then it's hard for the new person to get the trust of a community because all these other media outlets are pointing at them saying that's ridiculous. Don't listen to that guy or girl.
Yeah, that's such an important distinction, what you just said, because trust isn't rebuilt through messaging. It's rebuilt through structure and behavior. And that really changes everything. Now, Adam, the music industry is a perfect example of broken systems, okay? We know this. Studies show that the vast majority of artists signed to labels never recoup, yet independent artists like Sons of Legion have proven that direct-to-fan models can, in fact, outperform the traditional gatekeepers when done right, okay? So as one of the most successful independent artists right now in the world, what is the biggest lie creatives are still being told? And what does sustainable independence actually require?
That's a really good question. I think the first part is understanding the difference between a lie and just a shift in perspective or a lack of awareness in perspective. I don't really think artists are taught a lie. I don't think they are taught the perspective, which is a little bit different. And what I mean by that is no one's actually telling the artist, you need to do this. There's no person telling the artist that. It could be sometimes the artists telling themselves that, or they watch movies that tell them that, but there's no person saying you have to. The difference of the perspective, though, is that most artists believe that they have to get an executive to be on their side, or an executive has to validate them. So they're worried about one or group of people who at a record company or a publishing company or a management company to give them validation instead of going directly to fans. And that's the big misconception. It's the perspective shift of you don't need a few executives to tell you you're good if there's 1,000 fans in front of you telling you you're good. And so as long as that perspective shifts, especially in a time right now with social media where anyone could put out music at any time, they don't have to go through a system, they don't have to wait for someone's approval. I think it's just important for artists to actually go back to how music used to be, where you would perform in front of people and they would tell you if the song was good or not, rather than just hoping someone finds you and discovers you. And when you remove that idea of being discovered and go into, I already am here, that's a different shift of perspective.
I like that perspective. That's powerful. And also, independence isn't about doing everything alone. It's about owning the relationship and having that connection with the fans. And you've done that so brilliantly without having to force the needle too much. And this pivots very nicely into my next question for you, Brian. Capital is often deployed without alignment. And we see the fallout everywhere. We know from statistics, if you look at the McKinsey reports, they've shown that misaligned investments erode long-term enterprise value, even when short-term returns look strong, right? So what problem do you see with how capital is typically deployed today? And how does that alignment that we're talking about completely change outcomes when backing creators like Adam and Sons of Legion, innovators, or the unconventional visionaries?
Again, different ways to answer that depending upon the corporation or the independent company. If people don't like to rock the boat, there's someone that gets a budget. The marketing guy gets a budget. The PR person gets their allotment. The management team gets their allotment, and they just want to keep the systems moving, right? They don't want to risk their job. I mean, especially in today's world, AI is replacing everything. So I think that question's even more difficult today for someone that may know, hey, we should spend money over here. But because there's no history spending money over there, they have nothing to point to and say that's going to work. Very difficult for someone to stand up in a company meeting room or to go to their superiors and say, hey, listen, we need to move money to this place, to this place. All they're going to get told again is from the higher up, who's also comfortable in their position to say, we're not doing anything different. Just keep putting the budget to that and just spend it to the dollar, because next year it's going to be, if there's any bit of a profitability, you're going to get a boost in that budget and just keep that machine going. So there's that going on. And then there's also influence from what's happening in the world. People try to jump on a trend to allocate capital and expect some sort of return on that. But it doesn't work like that. There's always needs to be a long-term play and foundation. If you're before the trend because you spotted it, or because, you know, again, the great things that Journey and Adam are doing, if you can identify a movement happening somewhere through things like AI and all this data collection points, and prepare yourself for that movement, and when it starts to happen, you can allocate capital into that movement and actually see some trajectory and some increase in whatever the return is, whatever your call to action is. But trying to throw capital after something in the midst of a movement, it's just a waste of time. It's a waste of money. The messaging isn't clear because it's not consistent with prior marketing. So there's a lot of different pieces going. There really needs to be a well thought out plan on any capital positioning in the market. And the things that we do are very like a brain surgeon on where do we allocate capital? How is it used? What's the return on it? And for me, it's because I made every mistake you could think of over the last 2 decades. So when you get a little bit older and wiser, you know, the most valuable thing in my life is I know what not to do. So that I can't even put a price tag on that. So when you start to see things happening, you know where to put resources. I think Adam speaks violently for this as well. His success and what he's done is also his life lessons and experience. So when you start to put all these things together and the market lines up with that, you can just create magic, and you don't even need to spend a lot of money. If the messaging is good, the content's good, it's genuine, it connects with your audience, whether you're selling a piece of IP, a service, a product, doesn't matter. If the messaging is genuine and the audience can feel it being genuine, my entire history is get one customer or get one fan, get one listener. And then that turns to 2, then that turns 4, then that turns to 8, then that turns to 16. The multiplier can move as long as there's a connection between you and that community that you're building.
And that reframes capital as a responsibility, not just leverage. And that's a conversation, in fact, more leaders need to hear, and more artists alike. Now, Adam, creators today are burned out. Platforms monetize their audiences, control their reach, and can change the rules really overnight. And that instability is pushing artists to rethink everything. So what specific problem does JRNY solve for the independent artists and creators? And why is ownership the missing piece in the creator economy?
Yeah. So the company is called Journey Technologies. And the reason why it's called that, for a few reasons, but I'll keep one that's best for musicians to know, is that it follows the journey of the fan or the person who's coming to be introduced to your product or music or your content. But for the first time, there's a through line. And what I mean by that is, if you look at, let's take Spotify, for example, Spotify tells you have super fans. They don't tell you who they are. Or if you go to YouTube, you can watch videos, but you can't inbox the artist. You have to find their email from going to an about page or doing some like workaround. Or if you're on Facebook, I can't message a fan on Facebook unless they message me first. So there's all these different sort of small nuances of each platform that actually almost create a barrier between you and the fan or the people who are listening for content. And even when it comes down to the algorithm, if you put out a post right now, like we have 2 million plus people on our Facebook page. If I put out a post, it only shows that post at 3 to 10% of people, depending on the time of day, which means they are choosing who gets to see this, even though the fans have signed up to see it. And so It's almost like there's this distortion on both sides, right? So what Journey does, it allows everyone to get every post. It allows everyone to see everything you're doing. But more importantly, it allows you as the creator to also see what they're doing. So you get to understand, what are your top songs? How much had the listen time? How much was the watch time of your top videos? Did people go from your video and then go over to buy merch? And if so, what was the song that inspired them to go buy more merch? It's able to predict behavior because it's for the first time showing you what all of the sites are doing separately and putting it into one vertical. And so with that one vertical, with a very powerful system that we built with AI, we're able to understand behavior at a molecular level, which allows you as the artist to not have to, and I'll be honest with this, sell yourself for something that you really don't want to do, back to Brian's point, just to create shock in a marketplace, hoping to cut through and create some noise, but not create intention, not create integrity, not create a connection. A lot of what we see right now is, I mean, if you look at the Grammys and all these other things, I don't even want to be around most of these people. Some of the things that they're doing, I'm being honest, I don't want to be in a room with these people. The things that people are willing to do for a little bit of success and fame that is not going to leave any real impact in a way that I consider integrity in the world, just to get an award, to me, that doesn't even connect. I'd rather do exactly what we're doing, connect with real fans and make a real impact, than get an award because I, wore the least amount of clothes or said the most provocative thing or had the devil in my music video. Like, it just doesn't make sense anymore. So we're creating something that has, I think, more of a connection for fans and for the creators.
You are 100% right. And that was very well put and very well said. And I love how you described all the nuances that all these platforms collectively have that we don't even think twice about, right? But when you look at how it's aggregated back to a community, there's gaps. There's a lot of problems with those platforms. And I love that journey is fixing that problem. And that's the shift right there, from rented audiences to owned ecosystems, right? That's
Exactly.
what you're doing.
Exactly.
So, Brian, most partnerships fail not because of bad intentions, but because they're transactional instead of intentional. We talk about this all the time. And Deloitte reports that value-driven partnerships outperform purely financial alliances over time. It's always the case. So how do you identify those partnerships that are worth scaling, not just financially, but ethically and culturally? And why does the idea of, you say this all the time, light attracting light, actually matter in leadership?
Oh, it completely matters. I have to reference my mom because she will say partners are for dancing. And I agree with her for most of my career. But then you find someone like Adam and you can create a real true partnership. The thing about Adam and I, and you can interrupt me, I don't want to speak for you, but what I love about this guy is many things, but we're not motivated by money or things or materialistic things. So when that is off the table, there's really nothing that can get in the way of that partnership, right? The only thing that could happen is, a spouse or a significant other or a family member could come in with some other something to maybe affect me, to maybe affect Adam. But if you put that aside, when you have personalities that just want to do good and they want to make an impact, they want to help people, they want to create opportunities for people, they want to show a better way. You move mountains with that type of partnership. That's why I always look at things like integrity, morals, and values, and that's key. But then over the last few years, I think empathy for me went to the top of the list. I need to see somebody that feels a person's pain or humanity's pain. I need to see that, because if you don't have that in you, then you don't care about people. We all, I think we're all put on this planet to help one another. So if I can align with partnerships like that, whatever the business, whatever we're creating, I know we can overcome any issue, any maybe conflict that we may have on our different styles of management or whatever our motivators are. But at the end of the day, our goal is the same. We want to help people. So how can you even fight? How can two people fight about that? Ideally, it would be like, I don't want to help somebody today because I want to go take a private jet somewhere. Like that's what happens. That's when the conflict comes up. But when you have a resource there and you're trying to grow that resource and you're both aligned on sharing that resource with the world, there's really nothing that should interrupt that. The devil will try. The devil is a creative, sneaky, very clever SOB. And I've learned on my career too, usually the devil will show something really, really shiny at me when I'm on a good path, when everything's humming. And it's looked at least in my history, I used to look at that and say, oh, that's another great opportunity to throw onto this. But that's not the case. It's something to divert you from what's clicking and what's happening. So that your listeners, whether you're spiritual or religious, you believe in faith, you believe in the universe, you believe in karma, there is definitely something magical about life if you just let it happen. And even the way Adam and I met, there's no coincidences, there's no accidents. And our alignment, our trust that we have with each other immediately, it's been really not even real. So I'm very grateful for being involved with him in his life and helping any way I can. And these are the things that I want to do with my life, and I appreciate him reciprocating that very much.
Wow. Well, that's legacy leadership, when scale follows alignment, not the other way around.
Yes, ma'am.
So Adam, I mean, he said a lot of stuff about you right there. I mean, this is a match made in heaven. Independent artists today are no longer just musicians, right? They're entrepreneurs like yourself, and community builders and cultural leaders navigating systems that weren't designed for them. So when artists and creators hear your story, what's the one thing you hope they learn? And why do you believe conversations like this need to be shared to change how creatives think about their future?
I mean, that's a really deep question. I'll do my best to find an answer, because what I've realized in life is I can't teach someone something who's not ready to learn it. So all I can do is put energy out, and who's ready to accept that energy, it'll absorb. All right. Other than that, I'm usually like pushing something too hard that doesn't need to be. So my only hope for artists in general, people who are creating something, is to truly find their soul's mission. And I don't mean that in any way other than exactly what I'm saying. It's not like a metaphorical statement. I'm talking about find your soul's mission, stay true to it, remove all things that are distorting from it. Anything that pulls you back or away from it, remove them. Because kind of similar to what Brian was saying, there's so many traps happening right now. I would say there's more traps for your soul's attention. What I mean by this is wherever you put your eyes, that's where you're paying attention. And you're paying with the time of your life, which you can't refund, recycle, or reuse. So there's more traps to pull that attention, to pull whatever your soul's mission is, than ever before in history. With our phones, with all the theatrics, all the dramas, with all the camouflage, let's be honest, a lot in pop culture is camouflage. I mean, if you look at the money, how it's really broken down, artists, athletes, actors, models, they make up a very small percentage of people who are actually wealthy in the world. I mean, I think it's less than 100,000 people of all of them combined. But if you look at all the millionaires in America, there's 24 million millionaires in America. Most of them are not doing all those things, but that's what everyone knows. They know the dramas and the traumas of all the artists and the rappers and singers and who's dating who. That's all just camouflage. And so if anything I can say to someone is find your core audience. They're all out there. There's billions of people in the world. And if you're doing something that's valuable, that you feel has value, and someone else says, hey, I feel this has value, that's the currency you need. And that's all you have to work with. That's the resonance that you need to follow. And you don't need to chase anyone else, because the beauty of this is that everyone is unique. I'm not going to be you. You're not going to be me. But if you can find that thing that makes you truly special and then grow that and give that to others, I think that's a beauty you can live in life. And from that, I think you'll find a life that's well deserved to live.
And that's exactly why this conversation matters, because it gives people permission to rethink what's possible. And like you said, it's connecting with the creator. It's allowing the universe to allow you to be aligned, but that doesn't happen for everybody at the same time. That's really a moment that is earned. It's not just given. The universe rewards intent. The universe rewards consistency, and the universe rewards hard work. It does not reward people sitting in stagnation, waiting for something to be handed. So with all of what you're saying, it resonates so deeply, even with myself. And Brian is sitting there saying the same thing about how far he's come along the way and where he's at right now and where he's supposed to be. That when you have that conversation where I totally understand what you're saying, and it's a symbiotic, universal, almost language that we're speaking in between the lines, because there's people listening and they're either receiving this as this makes sense and a light went off, or this is all, fluff.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about finding that alignment, right? Those ecosystems. But I'm glad that it's brought us to this conversation. And I think humanity is waking up. I really do. All right. To learn more, you can visit diamondlake.com and EIE.rocks. And you can follow Brian on the gram at Brian_J_Esposito. And to explore Adam's work, you can go to sonsoflegion.com and follow them on Instagram at Sons of Legion to support independent artistry and creator ownership. The segment has been brought to you by Diamond Lake and its subsidiaries, where influence meets intention. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. We'll be right back after this.
A Moment of Zen is brought to you by Tortora Promotions, specializing in white glove digital marketing, social media management, professional videography, and PR services. Based in New York City and partnering with hundreds of businesses nationwide, they deliver proven strategies that bring more customers through the door. If your old marketing methods aren't keeping up, Tortora Promotions can step in to help you stay ahead. Grow your brand and drive real results. Reach out today and follow them on Instagram at Tortora Promotions. Your business deserves it.
Well, that's a wrap, my dear friends. We are at the end of our date. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Remember to join me right here on A Moment of Zen every Saturday, or you could head to amomentofzen.com for live listening links and episode downloads in your city. Also remember that we're live on Traverse TV Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern. We upload on our YouTube channel Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern, and all episodes of A Moment of Zen are available on your home TV, streaming platform, you could head directly to mox.yourhometv.com. That's family-friendly, worldwide, free digital streaming to you. Thank you for listening to A Moment of Xen. It's been an absolute pleasure being your host. Thanks again to all of our sponsors that continue to make this show possible. And remember that happiness is the only thing that multiplies when you share it. We'll be back next week.